My name's Cheryl. I'm from ChangeAGEnts, and my mucker over there is also from ChangeAGEnts. We were once upon a time the director and the associate director of a government program called Better Government for Older People. We span out into the co-op sector in 2009, so we've been around for a while. We've evolved because we were a legacy organisation when we first came into the co-op movement from BGOP. We are now a collective, and our strapline is also explains what we are. So we're ChangeAGEnts, and we are the Cooperative Guild of Social and Community Workers. So we're big on Principle 7. So I'm going to open this slot and then hand over to Mervyn. We are the hinge and bracket of the co-op movement. We like to play our tune. So slide 1. Although other people have called us the John Lennon and Paul McCartney of the co-op movement, and there's a prize if you can guess which one's which. So, okay, it's my birthday next week, and if anybody would like to make me really happy, send me a little badge that says that I am the president of the Sherry Arnstein fan club, because it was Sherry Arnstein in 1969 who formed Einstein's ladder of participation. And this came out of work around mental health and mental illness, severe and enduring mental illness, when the issue was about if, and this applies to disabled and older people in terms of the care we are given and expected to receive, is that if you are having a breakdown, either psychologically, emotionally, or physically, the question is, who is the person that is to be retrieved? The people who are caring for us, who are you helping to bring back into the world, into your best life? And she looked at the ladder of participation, and sad to say, just like the housing question, all these things are still really relevant. So if you go to the bottom of this ladder with manipulation, when this ladder was first formed, that manipulation was around psychology, was around, and still now we can be, I'm a mental health social worker by profession. If a GP and myself, not now but then, signed a paper, I can take your liberty. No ifs, no buts, your liberty's gone. And in terms of what happens to you, people will know it as a section because it is a section of the Mental Health Act. Whatever happens to you then is in our hands. You have no control at all. So the very bottom of that ladder is manipulation and therapy, and it's still going on now. And some of you who are not part of the disabled community will have heard us talking about gaslighting. Gaslighting is what happens when you are being manipulated, and it is still going on now. If you go further into the ladder, you go up this ladder, you get to informing, consultation, placation. And a lot of us, if we're not actively being gaslit, if we're not being manipulated, we're being placated. And that's where you've got the tokenism, where you say, yes, we've consulted on this, and a paper comes pre-formed and the box is ticked. And they say, well, this organisation, and these people agreed to this. And it's usually done with a flip chart and stickies, which is why if you put one near me, I will have an attack, because it's parlor games for useful idiots, and I'm not an idiot. So you're further up to that ladder, and we're starting to get in partnership, which is fine. But in a partnership, not all partnerships are equal. And some of us are quite happy with that, in our marriages, in our families, in our workplaces, in our friendship groups, whatever. We might say, okay, to some unequal partnerships. But when there's a therapeutic or a state element to this, an unequal partnership that is not had any permission for is not acceptable. So there's partnership, going to delegated power. And then at the very top of that ladder is citizen control. And I think over these 3 days, the debates and discussions we're having is, how do we, as cooperators, co-produce so that citizens, and you marry up the values and principles of cooperation with this ladder of citizen participation. If you are a cooperator, you would expect that we are on the top rung of the ladder at number 8. Or I would argue very strongly that's not cooperation, unless there is permission and discrete reasons to be moving around that ladder for a particular purpose, an agreed purpose. But not to be expected to be at that ladder at number 8 unless the circumstances that are agreed necessitate us moving around, should not be acceptable for cooperators. Can I have slide number 2, please, Veronica? Okay, now in 1971, Eleanor Ostrom, she produced the ladder of co-production. And co-production, if you like, was an evolving of participation. And I would give you a red flag with this immediately is, Shirley Armstein was very clearly talking about people. Once we start talking about co-production, this is now workers looking at co-production and inviting others in. So that in and of itself already has a red flag in its evolution. But even so, at the bottom of the ladder, we are educating and coercing. So we're doing to people, and we're doing to people who are seen as a problem or a broken thing to be fixed, and that we are passively going to wait around to be fixed. Now that might have gone, you know, from the 1945 kind of state-controlled way of fixing things and people. But the world has moved on, and the silent generation that accepted being fixed or educated or dying. Life is such that that age group, that cohort is going. The baby boomers are the ones that are coming forward now and looking at care. Those bottom rungs of the ladder are not acceptable to us. So we need to start, you know, with premise from that point. This is not acceptable to us, and any of our organizations, either older people's controlled organizations or disabled organizations, have been saying very loudly and very clearly, this is not acceptable to us. So then we move up the ladder and we're doing 4. So we're engaging and we're involving people, but again, it's engagement, consultation, informing. We're still playing parlor games. We're still invited in. We're still seeing, this is what we've got here, scoped out, Blue Peter, one we preferred, you know, we prepared for you earlier. What is your preferred choice of these very limited choices that we are offering to you? And then if you go to the top of the ladder, we have co-production and co-design in an equal and reciprocal partnership. What does that sound like to you? Because to me, that sounds like principle 7, what it should be if it wasn't the much malnourished, we care for the community. And I think what we really need to do is stop caring for the community and start caring with the community and start to write principle 7 as cooperators, as equal, reciprocal partners. Okay, that's me. And what I would just add to that is, when you think about this, and I'm really glad that my friend from the Co-op Party Disability Forum is here. Disposable people. We started to look at disposable people, and Duncan started to write a report, and I'd quickly like to talk about disposable people. and terms that are used around disposable people. So who are the disposable people? Well, they're older people and disabled people mostly. And they're also the affiliates to us, the people who care for us, either unpaid, our friends, our family, our lovers and loved ones, or the people who are paid very little and have excruciating working conditions to care for us. And if you start to unpack that, there's a further gender bias. It's women on the whole who are the disposable people, either as the older, disabled or carers. It's around race, and it's around class. So if you look at who these most disposable people are, it's the older, it's the disabled, it's women and people who are associated with women. So if you work in an area that is considered women's work, regardless of your biology, you've just been put into the woman gender box. Whether you identify that way or not, you are now disposable. Race, we have agencies that go across the world to bring people to the UK and other wealthy Western nations to work in the lowest paid, hardest jobs that we have. Disposable people, to work with the other disposable people. And the people who they are being encouraged to come and work for because there's a gap are the working class people who have found a better job in Lidl. And this is how we choose to run our care services. Now, for me, as somebody who fits into a lot of those boxes, but mostly the box I'm in today is a cooperator, that's not acceptable. And if we do anything over these 3 days, we just put that in a box and dispose of it. Let's dispose of the idea around disposable people. Okay, that's me done. And it's over to Mervyn.
Thanks. Wow, is that my introduction?
Yeah,
that's fine. Thanks very much indeed.
So thank you, Cheryl, as well as an introduction.
Okay, so thanks for that. And that was, as Veronica's just said, very powerful. And I want to build on that. And I want to do it with a series of provocations. That's not to be difficult or antagonistic, but to bring about some challenging for the cooperative itself. And I suppose there are 2 or 3 things that I'd want to stress. Since coming into the cooperative sector, as Cheryl said, from better government for older people in the programme, I was very new to the co-op. And my little saying, which I've already quoted to you, is that the co-op is by and large seen as carrots and coffins. And the co-op is far more than carrots and coffins. And what struck me about looking at cooperative values and principles was that it had the potential to really shape, reshape and reimagine the very constructs of what we mean by social care. And I have to say that apart from a few, if you like, significant illustrations, which one must applaud and celebrate, I had been over the last X number of years, 12 years, probably more than that, disappointed that whilst we talk about procurement and commissioning and social workers and whatever, to me, the biggest challenge we have in realizing the potential of co-production and meaningful partnerships within a cooperative framework, our biggest challenge is with ourselves. It is within the cooperative sector itself that is one of the significant blockages of trying to create a new way of thinking about social care. So the first provocation is that before we start looking at other partners, we need to look in the cooperative mirror, whether that be the Cooperative Party, whether that be Cooperative UK or the cooperative group itself or individual co-ops. We need to say, what does social care mean? How do we think about social care? And picking up on the point that's powerfully made just now is, how do we think about disposable people? Disposable people are there often to be rescued and seen as victims. And therefore, when I think about co-production and partnership, it's about, first of all, being, how do I think about that older person, that person living with learning difficulties or mental health problems or disabilities? How do I think about them? And often that thinking, even within the co-op, is about patronisation and paternalism, rather than about what I believe and you believe the co-op values and principles are about. And that's around ownership, control, and benefit. And the second provocation, which I want to share with you, not to be difficult, but just to get us to think a bit, and that is, how far, what is our offer? What is the cooperative offer in terms of social care? And what strikes me, generally beyond the cooperative sector, within the very social care sector itself, it's about sustaining and developing the constructs that we have constructed since the mid-1800s. That's the challenge. That's the challenge. And what I also then ask is, how far, what is this this offer that we're actually making? Is it, as I've heard some cooperators say over the years, that it's really about upgrading the existing provisions, whether they be private, whether they be independent or being voluntary? We're upgrading them. What does that mean? What does that mean for an 80-year-old living in a care home with very little power, with their relatives with very little power, and indeed with staff with very little power, with very little notions of partnership or co-designing or co-production? And when my mother was in long-term care, when my sister and I were supporting her through that journey, the care home evicted her with 4 weeks' notice. And why did they do that? The formal reason they gave was that we can't meet your mother's needs because we can't really meet your needs. There was no appeal, and we had to find, within 4 weeks, negotiating with the local authority about the finance, finding an alternative placement for her. And that there is, and I think Chris alluded to this, there is no security in residential care. There is no security within social care constructs and architecture. And therefore, what I challenge is that, how far are our values and our principles and our understanding of co-production and partnerships based purely with a foundation of human rights? I hear very little about rights-based social care within the cooperative sector. So that's one of my challenges. My second is that we somehow have this belief that the co-op and co-op social care and its structures and its governance can actually deal with and stop manipulation and coercion. Well, my experience is it don't always follow. And therefore, we need to be very honest about our offer, what it is we mean by social care, what do we mean by co-production and design. And I see that Philip's point is it's almost like the poor law, i.e. the workhouse. I call it warehomes, based on the 1800s, which we've upgraded, we've changed, but what we fundamentally have not changed is this notion of older people, taking the point that Cheryl raised just earlier, disposable people are to be disposed of in an institution. And how far, the question I ask, often care cooperatives and the cooperative sector, is how far do member service users, if we want to call recipients of care and support that, how far are they engaged in the governance of the services that they are receiving? How far are families? And if COVID has taught us anything in relation to residential care, it is they figure for nothing. They are not just disposable, they are disposed of. And therefore, that provocation, I think, we need to take into account. What I do accept, coming from the co-op sector and the last few years and the journey that we have travelled, is that the co-op does have the potential, given those preconditions that I've outlined, is to reframe care. And again, Susie picked this point up earlier this morning. If a letter comes into a local authority concerning an older adult or someone living with learning difficulties, there's an automatic assumption that that goes on the desk of the director of adult social care or social services. Why? Why is that assumption made? Because we have segregated. And I think Cheryl and earlier on, there was this notion of boxes. And I've often been told we really must think outside the box. You ask a professional to think outside the box and they build a bigger box. They do not get rid of the very box and rethink social care, rethink how we think about older people, people with learning disabilities, mental health and disability, and so on and so forth. So we talk about the care crisis. And often the care crisis is framed in terms of resources, and I don't dispute that. It's framed in terms of we must have more beds, we must have more of this. Well, folks, I don't want more of the same. I don't want more residential care homes. I don't want more day centres. I don't want more services that put people in a box and expect them to really live. And I think, again, Chris Cook's comment just now is the profession has become the box. Absolutely spot on. So finally, if I may, if you will forgive this little tirade, this little provocation, building on Einstein's ladder and so on and so forth, which is absolutely brilliant, is we have beginning to think about and developing this very notion of fair care. Fair on everybody. That the services are not just co-designed, but they are co-owned, co-developed and co-governed. And again, reference back to Principle 7. And I could not agree more with what's been said. Principle 7 is, for me, still based on paternalism, gifting and benevolence. Whereas Principle 7 has to be far more than that. And it goes back to one of Susie's points earlier this morning. And that is, we got to, when we think about social care and we think about services and responses, we have to think outside the health and social care box. We have to think about the environment, the built environment. We have to think about community safety. We have to think about income and poverty, discrimination, injustice. And it's at that point that if our services and our responses across civil and civic society is going to change, it has to be rights-based. It has to be based on our basic human rights. So what we're after is really looking at co-production, looking at partnerships within the wider context to change, to reimagine, to get rid of the existing architecture that places people in their boxes. And I think Susie, on one of her slides, talked about engaging with social workers on this journey. And I get that. But what is the social worker's task? What is their function? And how far does social work, let alone clinicians and the health service, actually reinforce the disposable nature of the users and so on and so forth? So Fair Care attempts to readjust and recalibrate, and it seeks to look at multi-stakeholding. It seems to and wishes to challenge existing constructs. And let me finish on this, that partnership and co-production can indeed become oppressive if we have not faced the very difficult question of how we think about social care and how we think about those groups that Cheryl mentioned. Thank you very much. I'm done.
That's great. I mean, thank you so much both. Thank you so much, both of you. I mean, if it was possible to say that, like, that sometimes in the room you feel like the tension, you really feel like people are really receiving you and nobody's actually rustling with biscuits or nobody's moving. That felt like it. I know I'm in a room on my own and I can't feel that, but I had this sense of people are actually really captivated by what you both are saying. Fantastic. I mean, Leah, let's open the floor to people. Who is anyone who Mark has got his hand up? Do you want to start with coming back on what Cheryl and Mervyn were talking about?
First thing I want to say is bravo. I'm actually have to pause.
Just take your time.
Sorry about that.
That's absolutely okay.
Sorry. Sometimes you meet along the way people who echo some of your thoughts, your feelings, and the action that you feel should be taken. We have in our group quite a cross-section of people that are affected by the very issues you're discussing, and I'm sure that other members are in the same boat. I'm thinking about one of the newer members to our group, Alex. She's actually with us today. I rather sense, hi Alex. Sorry.
Muted yourself, Mark. Sorry. There we go.
Yeah, I hadn't realised quite how this would affect me, so I'll come back to you.
Yeah, yeah, take a moment, just take a couple of deep breaths and then come back to us. That's absolutely fine. It has been really powerful. So thank you for actually stepping up and sharing. Maybe let's hand over to Neil now, and then we'll come back to you, Mag, later when you're ready.
Hi there, folks. Hi, Mervyn.
Hi there.
Old muckers.
Yeah.
I think what Mervyn is so spot on with everything that he says. I mean, from my own personal experience as a district nurse, and that's principally the reason why I left district nursing in the end, because the levels and standards of care and the number of critical incidents I put in about woeful lack of care, it just was never being listened to. And I remember being put in front of a group of 4 people, the CEO and other people wanted to know why I was complaining. And I just remember just going to them going to the meeting turn and just telling each of them that they'd all been basically promoted to their natural level of incompetence, and I quit at that point. I think that the history of this is really important, that we acknowledge the history of social care. And what Mervyn talks about is spot on, but it's the realization when he talks about workhouses as an example. Well, you know, when workhouses shut down from being workhouses, those very buildings were then used as care homes for the elderly. And it was a guy called Peter Townsend in the 1960s, and I have his book here. He actually highlighted this, and he was a wonderful researcher in relation to the fact that he went out there, for instance, and he was the first to take photographs. The book here is full of photographs of what workhouses were like, and the elderly, disposable people, as Cheryl would call them, were put into those homes. And the evidence is there, and it was Peter's work that actually moved and actually came up with social care policies, government-led, to actually change the situation. But unfortunately, we seem to have reverted. We seem to be, as you said, they're like the new workhouses of the past, in a sense, a lot of these places, because of the way, the capitalistic way that we run things, and the actual lack of budgets, etc. But I think what Mervyn talks about with the challenges for co-ops is also extremely relevant, because obviously you know that I've been doing research around co-ops for a number of years now. And the first thing I'd like to say really is, and it was Cliff Mills that gave me this, this quote, and actually I've looked at it and he's absolutely right. There are so many social enterprises out there that deliver care that are cooperatives but don't know it yet. It's about talking about people of groups of people like Veronica and Graham, etc., who've gone down the route of being a cooperative. But there are so many other groups out there that are doing the same thing or trying to do the same thing because of the same anxieties, the same issues that we've been talking here today. My challenge is to the cooperative movement, if you like, is to go out there and actually sell themselves more by actually going to those social enterprises. And I know several of them because I've supported several of them. My challenge is to try and get them on board in terms of the co-production, which you're talking about, the partnership. I mean, I should stop waffling on, but also we need to make sure when people talk about partnerships and co-production, they actually know what they're talking about. Because, there's a lot of councils out there that got on this sort of co-production and partnership road, but it's nothing to do with co-production or partnership. It's just joining two organisations together that just happen to have a similar business model. It's nothing to do with actually what co-production and partnerships actually mean. So my challenge, as I said, is to try and link up with these social enterprises out there that are already delivering care. I think there's a lot of mileage in that. I really do. But again, as I said yesterday, I'll shut up now because I could waffle on forever, and I won't.
Not at all, Neil. Thank you for that.
But thank you, Mervyn.
It's good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I've been so busy sort of vaccinating people.
Absolutely.
I'm COVID vaccinating. It's just things have got a bit mad. But yeah, hierarchy is still up there and present, certainly in NHS.
Absolutely.
It's stunning when I've gone back in there and I'm just looking at that from an objective point of view. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. There's a point from Sue in the chat, if people are sort of looking at that, talking about how we are going to be looking at care homes like we look at asylums now, how the system really is treating people at the moment. And yeah, what Mervyn was also saying, we don't need more of the same at all. It needs to be, as complex as it is, it needs to be a fundamental overall of what we're facing now. Otherwise, we won't be moving forward any little bit. So, yeah.
Can I say as well that a lot of the asylums became hospitals? And I was a mental health nurse when we closed down the South Yorkshire Asylum, which became Middlewood Hospital. And it was when Thatcher brought in care in the community, and I was on a ward that was geriatric women, many of whom had been put in care for doing What I did was have a child too young. That's why they were in the asylum. That was their mental illness. That is what lost them their liberty. When they were taken away from that community that they had formed on Ward 25, Middlewood Hospital, they died. They died. So one of the things that I would like us to think about as well is remain at home. When that language is used, we are doing everything in our power to enable you to remain at home. I'd agree with you, you are. But you know what? I'd like to get out a bit. So the idea that you can put somebody in their home and that's it, aim achieved, we want to help you remain at home. Listen to older people and disabled people when they say to you, I don't want to remain at home and wait for 15 minutes or an hour of a person coming into that home a day. I don't want that. So yeah, I'm agreeing with Brian. We do need a social revolution. I am a social revolutionary, as some of you may observe. And I'm disappointed with the co-op movement because we have ourselves become institutionalized into remaining at home. Why are we not using our values and principles to be cooperators? This is not our natural gut instinct of things to do. What happened to us that overrid our cooperative gene and allowed us just to become allies of a broken system that is killing people? Do you know, throughout COVID, when a lot of people were working from home, they remained at home, and good for them, it was cracking. 6 out of 10 disabled people died. And you know, the whole story and narrative of what happened during COVID and the difference between what was the life experience of some people and what was the life experience of others, we barely speak about it. It's almost as if we daren't speak about it. But if we don't acknowledge these things, we will not create better. We will not gather as we are today as cooperators and create that world. But, you know, as Chris was saying, you know, as I came into this meeting, we were looking at homes and the difference that a good home would make. We can do all of those things now. And that the joined up thinking that we need to do, we really need to spend more time with each other co-creating that. And when I say with each other, I mean disabled and older people as well.
Could I just add to this? It's a wonderful conversation, and thanks, Cheryl and Mervyn. Marvelous provocations. I spoke at a conference in the south of France a few years ago now, and I was on a panel with a lady who had set up a charity over there. You may recall there was a very, very hot summer in France. Maybe it was 10 years ago now, might be a little bit more, when the temperature was over 40 degrees for about 3 weeks. And there were about 10,000 older people died in their homes. Quite healthy people, doing okay, but they were by themselves. And, you know, in big apartments, typically little old ladies, but not always, you know, far from. And this lady had set up a charity, which basically was placing, you know, students typically in these big places, not to sort of care for people with needs, but to be there. And the results of that, the older people started teaching the younger people how, you know, how not to get food from the freezer and actually, you know, how to cook and how to do certain things, certain skills, life skills. And conversely, the younger people, well, showed Granny how to operate on the web. You know, I'm being simplistic, but this whole point about actually, you know, we need to get away from companies as corporations to company as in its original form of people who took bread together. The word company comes from, you know, a society of people to a common purpose, actually, who took bread together. Panos, you know. Not many people know that, and I could bawl for England on the subject. But that's what we need to get back to. Institutions as agreements rather to a common purpose, rather than these legal persons which operate through agents. And that, because it's the agency point that is the problem, you know, and the fiduciaries and the trusts. To me, trusts are an abomination. The trustee beneficiary relationship disempowers. And your point at the top of your first hierarchy about control, for me, the ultimate right of control is the right to say no.
Yeah.
You don't have control positively because you cannot make it so unless you're a sovereign. But the right to say no. Now, I came up with a word 10 years ago, and in fact, as an agreement, and I've got a website called non-dominium. You've heard of a condominium, condo. Well, I came up with the word non-dominium, and you'll find some of my thinking on nondominium.org.uk. I'll put the link in. And the idea of non-dominium is that you break the trustee down into two. You've got a custodian with a right of passive, you know, the right of ultimate veto to stop things being privatized is a good point of custody. So you hold land in custody with a custodian and the right of ultimate veto, but the right to say no. And then you got the steward who has the active power, but subject to the oversight of two other stakeholders, the users and the financiers. At the moment, you see, the reason I came up with the word non-dominium was that no stakeholder can dominate any other. That is not possible. And this has been the result of decades of action research. I came up with that, and I'm now actually busily implementing these things, you know, proof of concept. So let's talk about that, shall we, in the future. So I'll just leave those thoughts with you. And more power to your elbow, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to meet you. And Mervyn.
It's a pleasure to meet you too. And hopefully this is an introduction and not a goodbye. I'm from the Irish community. We always say a stranger is a friend you haven't met yet.
Thanks to Chris for that. And it's good to come across you as well. I was reminded as you were speaking about priorities that Margaret Gullett wrote a book quite recently, New Age. And she talks about the floods in New Orleans and the priorities given. And she spells out graphically that the priority that the rescuers had at that time was to rescue pets over and above older adults in their flooded homes. And that, for me, says a great deal. They cared for the pets more.
I've noticed that Alex had her hand up at one point and then took it down. Do you want to come in now, Alex, as well, to ask what you wanted?
Hi. Firstly, to say thank you to both speakers. Very powerful and very emotional. I've been a direct payment user for 17 years and a continuing healthcare user for 4 years. I'm kind of on the periphery, involved with the Ealing Equal Care Co-op group, but it's my husband that I've hijacked his entry into this conference because he couldn't come to this meeting. But it was very powerful. It was very emotional. I suppose with co-production, the groups that I'm involved with, there's a lot of complexity to that, because for true co-production, as I'm finding out more and more, maybe co-production is the wrong word for what I'm going to express, but it needs so many other agencies and stakeholders to be involved. So like, for example, we have a crisis with, not crisis, but a difficulty with recruiting care workers in Ealing. And one of the things is that house prices have gone up so much that they priced out the care workers who did used to live in these areas. So it's, so recruitment, and the council just aren't really listening to that sort of problem. So with co-production, it's complex because you actually need to involve more than just people involved with social care. It has to be housing, because that has knock-on effects, all sorts of things like that. Also, the issue of power. You see, as PA user, there are times when actually I need to have the power because I can't physically do things for myself. So if my PA says I need to go off to watch my children play football, and I say, well, I need to have a shower. So that, I think that is a kind of a stress, and something that the co-op movement need to address, is that actually sometimes I need to have the power.
And I think that's why I was talking about moving up that ladder. It's acceptable to move around that ladder if that's in agreement, but it comes back to what was said before about the power to say no. And that is around negotiation. And we've lost, I think, in a lot of ways, cooperation is also about negotiation. And we're losing, because we are so dominated and controlled and put into these boxes, that the power to negotiate, to have an honest discussion about what's needed. And I look great today, but there are other days when I'm on the floor in my own shit, yeah? And so I've got a big thumbs up to people who I hear, insulted. We use as an insult, arsewipe. We do that. But when you're the person that needs that, then the dignity, your humanity, the thing that you want to maintain about yourself is as real as the dignity and the humanity as the person who is gifting that to you. And that cooperation is something we just don't discuss, because the etiquette is such that, Cheryl Barrett, who's on the board of Co-ops UK, sometimes is laying in her own shit, is the truth, but it's not polite to say so in good company. But if that is a reality of my life, if I can't have the support to be that person, that's who I am. And I don't identify as that. I'm disabled, and that's an impairment, not an identity. I don't identify as that person, but it's a reality of this life. And if I'm going to have the same full life as other people that do not have my impairment, then I've got to have that negotiated relationship. I'm very fortunate in that so far I have that. I have the care that enables me to live the life I want to live, but I live in, that is precarious. When I'm not well and I go into hospital, nobody listens to my carer, nobody listens to me. And we talk about, we do the hand clapping for nurses, whatever. The last time I went into hospital, I was sat in a chair. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was my carer arguing with the nurse about get the fluid in her, while they were wanting to do a full panel of investigations. That was the last thing I heard as I collapsed into my own shite. The first thing I heard as I came back was the pain I felt when two nurses took me up off the floor and said, "What are you doing there?" That's a reality. The person you're looking at now is the same person that happened to. So when people say, Cheryl can get very angry, yeah, I can, because that shouldn't happen to anybody. Not me, not you, not to anybody. This is what we do, and this is what we expect people to accept. So I can hold those two thoughts in my head. Yes, I think nurses are great. Some of them do terrible things. Yes, I think carers are great. Some of them do terrible things. So the negotiation that we've got to have, and the joined up thinking that we need to have, means we've got to stop thinking. In the co-op movement, we have institutionalized ourselves into thinking that all co-ops are a business. So let me put you straight. Cooperation is a relational activity that happens between sentient beings. And some of that is formed into a business. So let's start there and then create the legal personalities that we need in order to enact the cooperation that we need. We start to, again, I'm going to be very Irish on you. We have a saying, if I was going there, I wouldn't start here. I don't think we should start at all cooperatives or a business. Cooperation is something that we do together, it's mutual. And if there's cooperation between yourself and your carer, then you both live your best lives. We're very good at silencing people, aren't we, Mervyn?
It's mind-blowing, Cheryl. It's great. And the honesty, you know, and the honesty and the passion, it's, yeah, you're absolutely right. And some of the, yeah, I'm not going to develop on that. This is so true about so many things, where so many things are just not okay to say, even though they're true. And that's just like valid for so many areas of our lives.
Mark's still there, and are you okay?
Could I say to you, Cheryl, that I came to the conclusion 2 years ago, after many, many years on this, that legal personality is the problem.
Yeah.
Right? It's creating a collective that is not us.
Yeah.
And in my view, what is needed is agreements to share risk, reward, cost, etc., etc. I'll give you an example of one which I love, and that's the Scottish Farmer Machinery Rings, which started in the mid-80s, when farmers just started cooperating to use equipment. Then they got pools of contractors who drove the equipment. Then they started cooperating in terms of buying the fuel, fertilizer, and all the rest. But they were still competing on the quality of produce. Yeah. And this platform that they created of a machinery ring has now been federated. They have a little secretariat, so they shared the cost of the people who run it. And this sort of approach of cooperation, as you say, rather than cooperatives, that to me, simple, lightweight agreements has massive application across everywhere. It enables us to strip out, you hear all this rhetoric about cost cutting. You know, the biggest cost of all that needs cut? It's the cost of the people rent seeking from everybody else. The cooperative advantage is the freedom from paying rent, economic rent, to parasites. I don't begrudge a fair return to people who actually, introduce, the productive assets and all the rest of that. That's what should be. But at the moment, I believe that COVID was the point, I call it peak rent. You've heard of peak oil? It was peak rent.
Yeah.
And what we're now seeing is, I think, a reaction against that, and the possibility for new and cooperative solutions. So that what we need to cooperate against is literally to say, well, how can we cut the biggest cost of all that these cost cutters keep telling us about? It's you.
Yeah.
You are the costs that need to be cut. Sorry, on a rant, guys. I'll shut up now.
Brilliant. Saved me a job. It's usually me that says that.
Thank you, Chris. Duncan's been patiently waiting. Duncan, do you want to go next?
That's okay, yeah. Mervyn and Cheryl know that I have problems with the Arnstein or Auburn ladders, right? For me, they're basically, they impose a framework that co-production is supposed to abolish, right? The person manipulating, right, must be put next to the manipulated. The coerced must sit next to the coercer. The way this can be done is through increasing legal accountability. We must never forget the fact that cooperatives survive in a democratic society that has a legal framework. I'm not in favor of people, I don't know, being incidental anarchists, right? During the Spanish Civil War, the anarchists were in fact the chief opponents of the people trying to create cooperatives. So as a citizen, right, I do participate. I am a citizen participator. That is my identity, no matter how difficult it is to oppose that, right? No matter how difficult it might be. And as Cheryl said quite rightly, cooperation is a relational activity. So get rid of the ladders and start creating genuine co-production in which we sit next to the very people who are operating us. We seek meetings, we seek confrontation, we seek demonstrations, right, to show that we are participating citizens, not that we want to become them.
The purpose of the ladder is just for an exploratory map to get the discussion going. It's not a framework. It's not a suggestion that we actually have that framework and then get a lift and you know, kind of move ourselves up to the top floor. It's just it starts the discussion, and it identified the problem first off, because it was power and control was, and I would argue still is, one of the things that we don't talk about in polite society, the etiquette of it. The powerless are expected not to notice the elephant in the room, that the powerful are making all the decisions on their behalf.
Okay. But co-production is a word that has many different meanings.
Absolutely.
In the particular mental health trust that I've been warring with for about 8 years, having created structures, having created engagement structures, they introduced co-production as a way of kicking all that out.
Exactly.
In other words, in the hands of the wrong people, co-production is a very dangerous word. And
I agree. Me and you are agreeing violently. The whole adoption of language that is positive and then doing something completely different is part of that coercion, manipulation, and is now commonly called gaslighting. So any of us who either work in or depend on those services have been gaslit at some time or another, because that's how it works. That's how the language is manipulated and used against us, like remain at home. I personally, and this is a disagreement, we don't disagree about many things, but when we disagree with a big disagreement, Mervyn and myself. I can't stand ABCD, community development, can't bear it. He can't even utter it in the same room as me, won't go near it, because that whole idea of strength-based assessment, I don't know anybody else in here who's been and had a PIP assessment and been to the tribunal. I've done it all. That was a strength-based assessment that said, basically, we're paying you nothing because we're looking at how strong and capable you are. We are promoting you. We are empowering you. No, they were denying me. They were cutting a budget and then using strength-based assessment in a manipulative and coercive way to deny me the support I need to do what I want to do. So
this is what's happening to, yeah,
exactly,
this is what's happening.
Yeah.
This is what's happening to people who are being offered so-called carers assessments. It's happening now in the country. And what's fundamental to it is the fact that whereas before, from the social fund, carers like myself did get a certain amount of payments, did get certain things which were to their benefit. Now, across the board, you're getting nothing. And that's what Boris is all about. And
well,
we need to challenge them.
Exactly. And what we do have to remember is the people who are doing this to us, and it is being done to us, they do have joined up thinking. So the way that the NHS England, I'm in England, most of us in England, the way that NHS England operates with the DWP and with other agencies, they have joined up thinking, and that works against us. We go around the periphery of all of this, listen to all of that manipulative language, and then try to pull out little bits of it. Like Mervyn said, the law that we operate in came from the period of the workhouse and before. Some of the poor law came from the 16th, 15th century. We still operate in that. We still do that. We still have deserving and undeserving poor, disposable people. That is the system in which we operate. And if we don't have joined up thinking, and if we don't start to look at how we defy that, there has to be some defiance here, that we defy that system and create wellness for ourselves despite it while we try to change it. Nothing's going to change for us.
I wonder if I can. I wonder.
Defiant.
Yeah, sorry, Doug. I refuse to take the bait that Cheryl has thrown to me, so that I refuse to engage in that debate. But a comment that I've been thinking about over the last 15 minutes or so during the discussion is that often people, the co-op perhaps, often wait to be given power. And I think we need to think more about taking power rather than just waiting for it to be given to us. I don't know what that might mean in practice, but changing that around is that we probably have more power than we think we have, and it's about taking it. What I don't have a sense in terms of social care is that enough of us are taking power back, if we ever had it in the first place. Brilliant discussion. Cheryl, you was on a roll.
I was having a good day. I'm sitting up.
Well, we're pleased to hear that, given your graphic descriptions of what it's like when you're not.
Well, exactly. But, you know, for some of us who are in that position, and sometimes in very public spaces, that's the reality of our life. And,
I know that.
If we don't have some humanity here, humanity comes in all kind of sizes and smells.
I think.
How about? Yeah, I can see that Mark has raised his hand. How about I stop the recording now and we'll continue the conversation before Rose joins us shortly.